They said that King Charles II never slept peacefully. Even amid the silks of Whitehall, surrounded by laughter, wine, and women, his nights were haunted. Servants whispered of the sounds coming from his chamber, muffled screams, the clatter of furniture, the frantic murmuring of a man begging unseen forces for mercy. Some claimed the king was cursed, others said he was simply mad. But those who saw his face at dawn, pale and dripping with sweat, knew that whatever tormented him was far beyond human reason. Charles II, the merry monarch, the man who brought back music, theater, and decadence to England, was not supposed to be afraid of anything. He had survived exile, civil war, betrayal, and countless assassination attempts. Yet in his later years, the shadow that followed him seemed older than any enemy, darker than any sin. It began long before the crown touched his head. In 1651, after his father, King Charles I, was executed by Oliver Cromwell's Parliament, the young prince became a fugitive. For months he fled across England, hunted like a fox. He disguised himself as a servant, slept in barns, hid in oak trees, and trusted strangers who could have betrayed him for a bag of gold. But one night, somewhere in the misty countryside of Shropshire, something happened that the king never spoke of. Not to his court, not to his mistresses, not even to his confessor. The story, pieced together from scattered letters and terrified servants, begins in a ruined manor called Boscobel House. Charles, exhausted from days on the run, arrived there with a handful of loyal followers. The house was owned by a Catholic family, the Giffords, who offered him shelter. They led him to a secret priest hole beneath the floorboard, a narrow, airless space once used to hide outlawed priests from Cromwell's men. Charles crawled inside, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, and lay in total darkness. The trapdoor closed above him. The air was damp and thick. The only sound was his own breathing. Hours passed. Then he heard something else. At first it was faint, like the rustle of fabric or the scratching of nails against stone. He thought it was a rat, but the sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from the very walls around him. Then came a whisper. Low, strained, and impossible to tell whether it belonged to a man or a woman. "Why do you hide, child of the beheaded one?" Charles froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed his back to the cold stone, clutching his dagger. The whisper came again, this time from behind him. "Do you think you can escape his fate?" He tried to call out, but no sound came. His throat tightened. Then silence. He waited, trembling, until dawn. When the trapdoor was lifted, Charles crawled out, pale and shaking. The men who saw him swore he looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. He demanded wine, drank it down, and refused to speak of what had happened. That morning they found deep scratches on the inside of the wall, not from rats, but from human fingers. Years later, when the monarchy was restored and Charles returned to London as king, he became the embodiment of life itself. He filled his court with laughter, banquets, plays, and endless celebration. The city adored him, but those who served closest to him noticed things, strange habits, small cracks in his merry mask. Every night before bed, he ordered candles placed in every corner of his chamber, as if afraid of the dark. He never slept alone. A servant or mistress always had to be near him, though he often woke screaming, drenched in sweat, insisting that she had come again. Rumors spread through the palace that the king was being haunted. Some said it was the ghost of his father, headless and weeping. Others whispered of a woman, a pale figure with hollow eyes, who appeared at the foot of his bed whispering secrets in an ancient tongue. One night, the royal physician, Sir Thomas Clifford, was summoned urgently. The king had collapsed during supper. Clifford found him unconscious, his face contorted in terror. When he came to, Charles demanded to be left alone, but Clifford overheard him muttering in Latin, "Sanguis regis, pactum fractum est," the blood of the king. The pact is broken. No one understood what that meant. But soon the king's behavior became more erratic. He ordered the chapel doors sealed for a week, claiming the air inside reeked of death. He refused to look into mirrors, saying that his reflection sometimes wasn't his own. His mistresses noticed it too. Barbara Palmer, the notorious Countess of Castlemaine, once fled his chamber screaming, claiming she had seen a figure standing behind the king, a woman with blood down her throat, smiling. The king laughed it off publicly, joking that his lovers were too imaginative for their own good, but the servants knew better. They heard him pacing at night, whispering to someone unseen, his voice trembling like a frightened child's. In 1679, as England was thrown into panic by the popish plot and talk of rebellion, the king's nightmares worsened. He began confiding in Father Huddleston, the same priest who had helped him hide after the Battle of Worcester years before. One evening, the priest was called to the royal bedchamber. What he saw there he would later write in a coded note that was never meant to be read by the public. The note, found centuries later in a Jesuit archive, read how the king was in great agitation, his body cold as marble. He spoke of a shadowed woman who had followed him since the day of his flight. He swore that she demanded something of him, something he had promised in the house of hiding. When I showed him the crucifix, he turned away, crying that no cross could break what was made in the dark. What promise could the young fugitive have made that haunted him even as a crowned king? The answer, some historians suggest, lies in a lost diary once kept by one of his loyal companions, Lord Wilmot. The surviving fragments, later discovered in a monastery in France, tell of that night at Boscobel and of a strange encounter before dawn. According to Wilmot, Charles had fallen asleep briefly after hours of fear. When he awoke, he claimed to have seen a woman crouching beside him in the dark, her face pale, her eyes black, and her hands marked with old wounds. She offered him safety, Wilmot wrote, and he, desperate and half-mad with fear, took her hand. When the king rose to power years later, he built palaces, gathered mistresses, and filled his life with endless pleasure, perhaps trying to drown out the memory of that bargain. But the nightmares never stopped. Even as his body aged, the terror remained. Those who were with him during his final illness said that he begged for more light in the room, shouting that she is here again, the one from the hole. The royal doctors dismissed it as fevered delirium. But when his heart finally stopped in 1685, a strange thing happened. As they prepared his body, the physician noticed faint dark marks on his wrist, as though from the grip of slender fingers burned into the flesh. No record explains them. The official cause of death was apoplexy, but Father Huddleston, who performed the king's last rites, later whispered that the king's eyes remained open even after death, wide and terrified, as if he saw something waiting for him beyond the veil. For centuries, the story of King Charles II's hidden nightmare was buried beneath the glittering legends of his reign. Yet among the dusty corridors of Whitehall, where the echoes of laughter still seem to linger, there are places where candles flicker for no reason, and some late-night guards claim they've heard a man's voice whispering desperately in the dark, "I kept my promise. Let me rest." Long after Charles II's death, a sealed wooden box was discovered behind a false wall in Boscobel House during renovations. Inside lay a fragment of parchment, brittle with age, and a silver ring engraved with a strange symbol, a circle bisected by 3 lines, forming what looked like a serpent devouring its own tail. The parchment, though half-rotted, contained a few legible words written in Charles's own hand. "I am bound. She follows still." Historians dismissed it as a forgery, but one man, Dr. Edmund Caro, a scholar of 17th century occult practices, believed otherwise. He spent years studying the king's letters and found a recurring symbol drawn in the margins, the same serpent ring mark, sometimes hidden beneath ink stains, sometimes worked into the loops of his signature. Caro traced the symbol to an old legend that predated Christianity, a pagan ritual once practiced in rural Shropshire. It told of a spirit called the Lady Beneath the Earth, a being said to protect fugitives and lost souls who pledged their loyalty to her. The cost of her protection was simple. One day she would come to claim what was hers. Charles, fleeing after Worcester, had been desperate. Surrounded by Cromwell's men, starving and terrified, he had stumbled into that ancient place, a manor built over the ruins of a pagan shrine. And in his desperation he may have whispered a vow in the darkness, promising anything for deliverance. Perhaps that vow saved him. He escaped England, lived in exile, and later returned triumphantly as king. But the debt had not been forgotten. The haunting, then, was not madness. It was collection. Caro's research took a dark turn when he began interviewing descendants of the Boscobel caretakers. One elderly woman, her family having served there for generations, recalled a story passed down through the centuries. The hidden king made a promise that night. He fed her with his fear and she spared his life, but she marked him so she'd find him again. Caro dismissed it as superstition, until the night he himself stayed in the old manor. He reported hearing scratching beneath the floorboards and a woman's whisper, repeating a phrase he couldn't understand. The next morning he found fresh dirt beneath the bed, as if something had crawled up from beneath the floor. When Caro's notes were found after his death, they ended abruptly with a line written in shaky handwriting. The pact remains. She waits for the blood of kings. But the tale doesn't end there. In the 19th century, during Queen Victoria's reign, strange reports began to emerge from Windsor Castle. Guards claimed to see a tall man in 17th century clothing wandering the halls at night, muttering prayers in a trembling voice. His eyes were wide with terror. Some said it was the ghost of Charles II, still unable to rest. And yet others spoke of something else, a pale woman following him, her face half in shadow, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The stories spread quietly through the royal servants, though no one dared speak of them publicly. The palace chaplain ordered the chapel reconsecrated after a maid was found unconscious near the royal crypt, whispering the same phrase Charles had spoken centuries before. The blood of the king, the pact is broken. What could it mean? One theory suggests that the pact was tied to the Stuart bloodline itself, that whatever Charles had bound himself to in 1651 followed not just him, but his descendants. The mysterious deaths, the madness that plagued later generations, the whispered scandals, all connected to a curse born in the mud and terror of Boscobel. Some even claimed that when King George III went mad, he raved about a black-eyed woman standing at the foot of his bed. His doctors dismissed it as delirium, but his words echoed the same description given by Charles's servants centuries before. If the curse was real, perhaps it was never truly broken. Perhaps the spirit that followed the merry monarch still lingers wherever royal blood walks. And though the British monarchy has changed, evolved and modernized, there are quiet corners of Buckingham Palace where cameras never reach, where, late at night, footsteps are heard and soft whispers rise from the shadows. They say sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear a voice pleading in an old, weary tone, "I kept my promise. Let me rest." But the whispers always answer, "Not yet."